Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thanks for joining us on another edition of American Potential. I love Alan Roach's voice on the intro to this. By the way, I've been emailing Alan. He's going to do an episode with us, and I'm excited about that. Alan is going to come on and be a guest and tell his story, because he's got an amazing story about how he became like this gigantic voiceover guy. And it's a great story. You're going to love it. Listen, today on the podcast, each year, Americans for Prosperity has an annual fly-in of grassroots leaders from all across the country to meet with their federal lawmakers to talk about issues that directly impact their local community. And this is a really important event because AFP leaders get to have face-to-face conversations with their representatives so they can share personal stories of how policies coming out of Washington have an impact on their community and their lives. And so what are some of these issues that people are facing? Well, obviously healthcare is so important to so many people. And a personal option puts the patient first and gives Americans more control over their healthcare decisions. Of course, Americans see every day how the Biden administration's policies are restraining energy production, and it's costing them more money. It's driving inflation and leaving less money in their pockets. These are just two issues, along with a whole host of others, that'll be discussed with lawmakers during this trip. On today's podcast, we have Lauren Stewart, who is the Senior Federal Affairs Liaison for Americans for Prosperity, and Americans for Prosperity Deputy State Director for Texas, Mack Morris, on to talk about how impactful this event is and what they plan on talking to lawmakers about. Lauren and Mack, thank you for joining us. Great to have you with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So Lauren, let's start with you. This is an incredible event. It's a great opportunity from all across the United States. Folks fly in, go to Capitol Hill, meet with their legislators. Talk about the event itself a little bit.
Absolutely, Jeff. So AFP's Capitol Conference is our annual premier government affairs event where we fly in our grassroots leaders, as you mentioned, from across the nation to discuss issues that most directly affect their communities. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill hear from our FedGA team all the time about the issues that you mentioned and what we're advocating in terms of breaking down barriers to citizens realizing their full potential in all areas of their lives, whether that's economic opportunity, whether that's healthcare, whether that's running a small business, or just making decisions for their family in terms of budgeting, in terms of their healthcare. They hear from our FedGA team on a regular basis, but there's nothing that packs quite the punch as when our grassroots leaders who are entrenched with their grassroots communities come and sit in front of their federal lawmakers on Capitol Hill and back up what our FedGA team has been saying. They know a person who's run a small business who is facing incredible barriers to even just staying open, government imposed policies that make it really difficult for them to succeed. Oh, by the way, Congressman, it's in your district. And this is what we're here to talk to you about today. So there's so much value that's brought from the grassroots being that in-district, in-state liaison to come to Capitol Hill and talk about the federal priorities that have real impact on real Americans' lives.
Yeah. It's so important. I think, obviously they talk about the bubble, the inside the beltway mentality.
It's real.
And it is real. And so this is an opportunity for people to bring their stories and how it's impacting people's lives. That's what this show, American Potential, is all about, is trying to break those government imposed barriers that people come in contact with. And there's so many of them. Inflation, we talk about that all
Absolutely.
The time, how inflation is a gigantic government imposed barrier for people. We've got people now who have to choose between, feeding their family or something else. And it's a tough trade-off. And people in Washington, I think, tend to forget that. Let me ask Mack. Mack, You're the deputy state director in the great state of Texas. I'd be remiss if I didn't just get this in. I am in Alaska, which is the only state bigger than Texas, right? Bigger than Texas right now. But they would probably skin me alive if I didn't say that, Mac, when I left this podcast. But the state of Texas, so diverse, so, you've got rural areas, you've got urban areas. Talk about this event and what it means. And we'll get into some of the issues you all are going to talk about as well that affect Texans every day.
Well, Jeff, comes down to, we got 30 million people here in the state of Texas, and they're from all different types of backgrounds. It's a huge state, not as big as Alaska, so we'll give that to them. But we have a lot more people here, a lot more opinions, a lot more needs, and there's a reason that people flock to Texas. Texas is a place for opportunity. And when we talk to constituents at our door operations or at events, they are concerned about the cost of living. They're concerned about healthcare. I'm going to tell you, they turn on the TV, they hear about problems. And the great thing about Capitol Conference is going directly to a member and their staff, explain what's going on in the district, what the feelings are and the opinions of people, and that people want solutions. They don't want the oversized top-down government from Washington, D.C. They rather have their government a little bit more like Texas's government. So we want to give people more opportunities. And by having those solid conversations with our members of Congress, they feel more connected. They see a value add with Americans for Prosperity. We're the conduit. We're the grassroots. And that's the incredible part of working with Lauren's team with Federal Affairs, is that we make those connections, and it helps drive real change and gives the narrative and the ability for our grassroots to help drive those with members of Congress.
Yeah, first of all, I don't know what they would do. They wouldn't know what to do with 30 million people in Alaska. They got a lot of space up here. They don't have 30 million people. They might have 30 million bears and moose if you counted all of them and smushed them together, but they don't have 30 million people. So Lauren, as we're going to Capitol Hill and having these discussions with lawmakers, what are some of the major issues? I mean, I mentioned healthcare, I mentioned inflation and some of the economic issues, but what are the big issues that we're going to bring to Capitol Hill to try and solve?
Absolutely. So, you mentioned healthcare, of course, things like energy that continues to be a struggle within our country, again, because of government imposed barriers and policies. So we're talking energy, we're talking workforce, things like the Employee Rights Act that empower employees and give them the option around their union participation. We're also talking budget. We just came off the debt ceiling fight, and the debt ceiling fight exists because our federal government doesn't balance its budget the way American families have to do on a daily, weekly basis. So we're talking solutions around reforming the federal budgeting process, which is really mind-blowing for a lot of people on Capitol Hill. But as we continue to see, it's absolutely necessary. And additionally, we're talking things like immigration. We just came off and are in the midst of a huge border crisis. We're driving solutions in those areas, which is where we really distinguish ourselves as an organization. We're the organization on Capitol Hill that has the solutions from a policy and grassroots standpoint to our nation's problems. And that's what we're bringing to lawmakers. We are about being for solutions. We're being for the path forward. Our Pathways to Prosperity is actually the name of our federal agenda this year, because that's what we're about. We want to connect lawmakers to that. We also want to connect lawmakers to the positive impact it will make on their constituents immediately. And that's again, the value of bringing folks like Mack and all of our wonderful state directors and grassroots leaders to Capitol Hill and saying, this is a tangible improvement that you can make for your constituents' lives. So we're talking the current issues of the day and how they kind of run the gamut, as well as our policy solutions and giving opportunities to our policy champions or lawmakers who would become policy champions to really help drive in that direction.
Yeah, there's we've talked so many times, and we've done a couple of episodes here with members of Congress. We had Congressman French Hill on just a couple of weeks ago, talking about the budget and some of the things that have happened there, the debt ceiling issue. These are issues that seem removed from average everyday Americans, but they're not, because they really do affect us. The debt that keeps building up, someone has to pay that someday, and it's easy to kick it down the road. But that's really what you're there to remind members of. And Mack, would love to hear your thoughts on, how we're taking the story of your everyday, single mom in Texas to Capitol Hill so people understand the impact that these issues have on them.
Well, Jeff, I think that's the biggest thing, bringing the stories. So when we talk to people at the doors or they come to events, they're sharing their heartfelt, authentic stories. And we pair that with the data that people want change. They want it the right way. And they are really asking their members of Congress to do the right thing. If they're making cuts to their family budget or they're suffering, they think that the government should be making better decisions and live within its means. And that's one of the big things that is something that happens with us at all of our events. People like economics, inflation. We have to fix this. And they understand that things don't change overnight. And that's part of where our ability with the grassroots, that conduit, is saying, how do we make practical changes now for long-term success for our country? Because we have to change the narrative. And that starts with everyday people sharing their personal stories. And we bring those personal stories to members of Congress so they can share them on the House floor or they can share them in their committee meetings. That makes a big difference for us.
Yeah, and I want to bring up healthcare. Let me ask you this, Mack. I mean, healthcare, we see government impose barriers on healthcare all the time. And, we are for something called the personal option, and we can explore that a little bit. But it's really allowing more freedom, more liberty within the area of healthcare and less government regulation. We see states that regulate that regulate healthcare. We see the federal government regulating who can have a health savings account and so many other things. That is something that really does affect people and their lives. Do you have any thoughts on that? And as we go to Capitol Hill, that message of liberty and that personal option in healthcare?
Absolutely. When it comes to the personal option, here in Texas, we've been working on state level bills to help with transparency, to drive down prices, give folks more accessible healthcare. But it's happening at the federal level. We have more members talking about healthcare more than ever before. I mean, even Congressman Pete Sessions here in Texas has one of the most encompassing bills to expand HSAs, to bring parity, to really make the nuanced fixes long-term instead of having that top-down kind of healthcare we have right now, because people are trapped between their doctor and the insurance companies. They're kind of like a commodity. They're not in charge. So we're helping drive this change, the narrative with members of Congress. They can fix this, and they need to listen to those stories to people back home. So it's really encouraging to see even multiple members from Texas saying, we can work on healthcare. We can do something. This should be bipartisan, and we can really put patients back in the driver's seats. I mean, this year I used an HSA. It made a huge difference for me and my family. I've talked to more people that's made a difference. Imagine if every American had access to that at the end of the day. Yeah. They'd be in charge of their healthcare. It'd be incredible.
Yeah, and you've got, as you mentioned, Congressman Sessions, a real policy champion, particularly on the healthcare side, has been great. Lauren, as we're talking about this, I've had an HSA for, many years, and I love it. And I did a show, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe 2-3 months ago, we did a show, and I was stunned to hear that the vast majority of Americans can't even have an HSA because the federal government won't allow them to have it. Talk about that and how that would open the opportunity for so many more in the area of healthcare.
Similar to you, Jeff and Mack, I started using an HSA with my family. Not only did I find the overall cost of my healthcare decreased, but the quality and access I had to healthcare drastically increased. So it is an absolute shame and must be corrected that the majority of Americans don't have access to HSA. This is how it works, Jeff. You have access to an HSA if your employer provides it. If you live in a certain area, it's the most unfair system in terms of access and control over your healthcare that arguably I think exists in government. So the Healthcare Fairness for All Act that Representative Sessions and the bill that Mack was just mentioning removes that. Every American can have access to an HSA. It doesn't matter where you work. Doesn't matter if your employee provides it or if there's a match. being an American, living in this country, having to deal with healthcare as an American family. Every American family does. Every American does. It's a kitchen table issue that, quite frankly, lawmakers, just like American families, we can't run away from it because we don't like it. And this is a solution that absolutely creates parity and fairness in the healthcare system. It empowers Americans, patients, not insurance companies, about the decisions they would make for their own healthcare. So to me, it's a common sense reform, but it would drastically change the game in terms of healthcare, quality of care, access to care, and overall lowering the cost, which is something, Mack, I know whenever we take meetings with folks on the Hill, is people cannot understand why they're paying so much for their healthcare and the quality of their product is absolutely terrible. Mack talked about folks feeling trapped in their healthcare. We've done some polling nationwide that showed the majority of Americans feel trapped in their healthcare. That is a shame. It doesn't need to be that way. And it is that way because of government imposed barriers and policies that put insurance companies, quite frankly, above patients.
It's incredible to think that there's the vast majority of Americans cannot have an HSA. And you talked about some of the barriers, but the biggest barrier is really the U.S. government decided,
yes.
that they're just not going to allow that. I mean, if
yes.
they would remove that barrier, and I guess it's a tax issue, they don't want all those dollars to be non-taxed. I mean, it's crazy, but that is a barrier that they have erected that is hurting people. Again, it's not for everyone. Not everyone should be on an HSA probably, but everybody should have the opportunity to decide if it's best for them. Yes, Lauren?
Absolutely. It's an opt-in. And we see this theme really parallels across all of the issues that we're going to be advocating for with Capitol Conference is, does it need to be that bacon is $8? It doesn't need to be that way. Why is it that way? Because of policies and government imposed inflation. Why does the price of gas, remain so incredibly high? Because government imposed regulation and policies. And what we're looking to do and what we're continuously advocating and will be advocating on through Capitol Conference is to have government remove those barriers. We're not going to force anybody to have an HSA. When it becomes available, it's an opt-in, right? We're not going to force anybody to do anything, but to really create that option and that free market across all industries is what we're advocating for here. I think the American people and the free market itself prove to choose and deliver better results than the U.S. government 10 times out of 10.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. People will make the best decision for themselves in their own self-interest
Absolutely.
rather than somebody else making the decision for them. We
Yes.
see that in the K through 12 education space at the state
Absolutely.
level, and some of the great stuff that's happened with education savings accounts in state after state after state. But it's the same thing here in healthcare. And frankly, it's the same thing in the economy. And
Yes.
Mack, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, obviously Texas is a big energy producing state. We've seen these barriers erected by the Biden administration for basically trying to drive up the cost of energy. There's really no other way to do it, to say it, is they're trying to make the decision about what energy should be used rather than allow citizens and the free market to make that decision. Your thoughts on that and what the federal government might be able to do to change that?
Sure, Jeff. When I think about Texas, it's an energy state. It's just not oil and gas. We're into solar. We're into renewables. Texas is really leading the way in that area. We're a huge export state for things. And when we don't allow people to make choices, the free market to be in effect, it's going to drive up our prices. It hurts the jobs here in the state of Texas. Again, with 30 million people here, they came here for a reason. It was a cheaper way of life, and costs are going up here, not just across the whole country, but here in Texas. I think it's really important for members of Congress to understand is that the bills they can pass, like permitting reform, those are good things. But there's things in this bureaucratic system that have arbitrarily, it seems very arbitrary, where they set up things that are in conflict with other rules or regulations. It's made it hard for companies to adjust to the market space. And we keep hearing that from business owners, But you just go to the pump and you ask people, look how expensive it is for gas now. Or if you're in Texas, you know it gets really hot here. We have over 100-degree days the majority of the summer.
On the energy side, that's such a driver of inflation, right? I mean, yes. People don't understand everything. The cost of gas goes up, everything goes up. Yeah. The cost of bacon, the cost of tires. I mean, you name it. It all goes up because of that. And these bad decisions, bad policies by the Biden administration, right?
Yes.
Has really been hurting Americans. And what can we do to drive down the inflation that we're seeing in the United States, and what can Congress do?
Absolutely. So I'm going to share how we do this is really ironic, and it just gives everybody a really good sense of Washington, D.C. and how this works. And one of the major things that we can do and that we're urging Congress to do is to repeal the natural gas tax that was included in what? The Inflation Reduction Act.
Sure.
So as you mentioned, of course, the cost of energy, the cost of gas, the cost of getting goods and services to and from where they need to be drives up the cost. So that is a huge thing that we are advocating for, is repealing the natural gas tax that was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act. And in terms of, horribly detrimental policies that have been passed by this administration, we've also seen a lot of really great work, bipartisan work, quite frankly, in passing two bills that I'd like to call out through both chambers with bipartisan support that would have, drastically improved the lives of Americans. And one of those is the ESG bill, which was the Environmental Social Governance bill that required, retirement funds managers to strictly invest based on growth, not on social, not on cultural, not on kind of the politics of the day. That passed with bipartisan support through both chambers, and the president vetoed it. The president vetoed that bill that passed through both chambers. And then more recently, the student loan forgiveness through the CRA. Both chambers voted against this, and the president has vetoed it. So what we're seeing and continue to see with this administration is not only driving failed policies through Congress, such as the Inflation Reduction Act, such as the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but that when Congress does come together to correct something that will drastically improve the state of our economy, that will drastically level the playing field in terms of education, that this president knocks it right down.
Yeah, it's incredible. Whether it is the student loan issue or the ESG, I mean, that's costing Americans money. It's money right out of their pocket.
Absolutely.
On these things. I guess I would ask this question of each of you. I used to work on Capitol Hill. For a lot of people, maybe they've never been to Capitol Hill. It's an interesting place for sure. Gotten more interesting over the years, I think. But do you have a favorite? Like, who's the coolest person you've ever seen when you visited Capitol Hill? Is there? I mean, you got some pretty cool people in your delegation that you get to visit with. But is there somebody you've gotten to see that's like, hey, I know them?
Okay, so big golf fan, and recently Live Golf has been a hot topic of conversation on Capitol Hill. So I was surprised and excited to see the Shark, Greg Norman himself, walking by in the Capitol one day. That was really exciting. Other interesting folks who I've seen coming to Capitol Hill to lobby include Bravo TV's Lisa Vanderpump, as well as Paris Hilton. And that to me, while I do giggle, get a little starstruck or things of that nature, but that to me just shows, the wide array of issues and things that come through our nation's capital, and how it touches everywhere from small business owners and rural Americans to getting, higher profile folks with loads of money fired up for specific causes and specific business ventures. I mean, Greg Norman was there to lobby against the government picking winners and losers in the golf industry. So it really does run parallel. So those are kind of, besides some of the wonderful lawmakers and policy champions that we're so privileged to work with every day with AFP, those are some three big ones that had me pause for a second, go, oh, wow.
I would say, well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I remember getting to meet Jane Goodall, who was the that hung out with the chimpanzees or whatever on a deal and had meetings with her. That was just one of many.
Crazy.
But always fun. Mac, how about you? Have you gotten to meet anybody famous or cool on Capitol Hill?
Not as cool as you think, but just having those relationships, meeting members that you've seen on TV and then having a personal relationship with them or really having the conversations has been a big change. Coming from the grassroots, didn't do that as much. So having those relationships now and then connecting everyday people back, they love those stories. They love the little picture or the video back from their member of Congress. Mm-hmm. And that makes grassroots folks feel really important too. So it's fun to come up there to DC and see them.
Well, awesome. How about the buildings there? I still have friends who talk about, I worked on the House side and I used to get my hair cut at the Senate barbershop and I used to walk through the catacomb thing. I guarantee you I'd get lost now, or they probably wouldn't. Well, they certainly wouldn't let me through, but I probably would get lost at such, it's just a weird place. What's your favorite, Lauren, what's your favorite building to go to on the Senate or House side?
So my favorite building is definitely the Hart Senate office building. It's got some really fantastic artwork in the lobby, and the Senate side, by virtue of a smaller number of members, is easier to navigate. My least favorite is Rayburn on the House side. All the hallways look exactly the same. I average anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 steps just in a morning there. So that would be my top and my least favorite.
You know what? I'm going to differ from Lauren here. I actually like Rayburn. It's got great views of the Capitol, so I enjoy that. But you do walk a lot. You do get lost. It's a maze. It's a bureaucratic maze. But, going over to Longworth is so much easier. Just making that circle floor to floor.
Yes.
You kind of map out where you're going. You can take the stairs. And it just makes it so much easier. But like Lauren said, I come in cowboy boots, so I really get my workout. And you get all those steps in. But it's always good to be on that side.
Well, listen, I used to work in the Rayburn building, and so I know the feeling about getting disoriented in that building. That's for sure. My favorite moment is there's a staircase right outside Statuary Hall in the Capitol building itself, and it's the staircase that Abraham Lincoln used to walk up and deliver the State of the Union address in the Statuary Hall there, and the steps still are really worn right there. I don't know that they've ever replaced them. And I just remember walking through there with my boss, Congressman Joel Heffley at the time, who just stopped we were there very late one night in the Capitol, and he stopped right before we went down those stairs, and he looked over at me and he said, Abraham Lincoln walked up these stairs.
Incredible.
And it just kind of sends a chill down your spine, that you're walking in that same building, those same places. So it's quite an amazing experience to be there at the Capitol.
It is.
Lauren, any final thoughts on this effort? And if people want to help us get the pathway to prosperity passed and get some of this good legislation passed in Congress, how do they do that?
Absolutely. So final thoughts here are Capitol Conference every year is my favorite and FedGA's favorite week of the year. It's quite frankly where we feel we're the most productive and get to flex our really jacked grassroots muscle on Capitol Hill. Our grassroots leaders, our state directors, our activists, our staff, they're the best in the business at what we do. And connecting them with federal lawmakers is really the sweet spot here. So in terms of how we can get some of this groundbreaking legislation passed, and groundbreaking in terms of the impact it would have on Americans' lives in a time where things have been a little tough, is, connecting with these guys, connecting with these state leaders within our various state chapters across the country. We even have representatives in areas that we don't have physical presence. There's no way that you can't be involved with an AFP. So I would highly encourage everybody, in terms of a government affairs standpoint, if you're interested in what's happening, what we're doing on Capitol Hill, follow us on Twitter at AFPGovAffairs.
All right. How about you, Mac? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think about, we have dozens of staffers across the state. Those are the relationships you can get involved with, not just the state director, but we have the ability to take action digitally. That's a way to connect with your lawmaker. But I think a big thing for us is after this great visit on Capitol Hill is connecting lawmakers back with people in district, having those events, those roundtables, and that's going to get people more in touch with their member of Congress, to be able to talk about the ideas. It becomes more real. It's just not what you see on TV. They can be part of the process, and we should really encourage that.
Well, and this is really what it's all about. I mean, we're all in this. We do this through Americans for Prosperity to try and make America a better place, citizens' lives better, and again, to remove those government-imposed barriers to their success. And so, thank you for all the great work you do, Lauren, for the great work you do through the Government Affairs shop at Americans for Prosperity, the great work you do, Mack, down in Texas, to keep Texas free and prosperous. And you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
So thank you both for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, great. Well, this is the way that you can make your voice heard, is to get out there, get involved through Americans for Prosperity. Either send online digital alerts and messages to your members of Congress, but also get involved so that you can visit with them, you can meet with them, you can let them know how the decisions that they make impact your life on a daily basis. And that's really important. And that's the difference that we're asking you to make. And this is a great opportunity to do that. If you want to talk more to any of the guests that we've had today or connect with Americans for Prosperity, feel free to send me an email at jeff@americanpotential.com. And I'll be happy to I'll respond to you and I'll get you connected to either Lauren or Mack or whoever at Americans for Prosperity you'd like to connect with. Thank you for joining us on another edition of American Potential.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.